Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. We're back after a small delay this morning. We're supposed to be on earlier this morning at 10. A few little scheduling mishaps, but everything got worked out fine, so no worries, and we're glad to be back with today's topic of questions from the community. There are a few that were posted already. If you are watching and you would like to ask additional questions, feel free to just post something in the community. You can do that either on the original event that was announced or just add a new topic in the discussions, and I'll get to those at the end if there are any. If not, no big deal. We'll be doing these again now and then, and of course we'll always be happy to answer whatever questions you ask, either in the community or in Stack Overflow. So I'm going to take a quick look down at a few that were asked on the original event. A couple of good ones in here that I think are interesting. The first from Will Scott is asking about how our open and create actions work in the context of mobile applications. And this is actually a really good question, because you're right that these URLs are somewhat meaningless on a mobile application, particularly if it's a native app. And for Android, this is something that we're actually handling through partially through intents. So the way that you can handle an open with like action with the native Drive client is through a special Drive open intent. And there's an Android example in the docs that shows how to take advantage of this. Apps can also just use the regular open intent as well, and just to handle any generic file open. But if you want to get specific Drive metadata and handle things in a different way, where you handle the file transfer yourself, get the file ID so you can do uploads and everything, the Drive open action is the one that you'd want to take advantage of. On iOS, we're a little bit behind there, something that we are looking at. And I would just say, in general, the integration with native apps on mobile is not quite to the level that it really should be. That's pretty compared to the integration that we have in the Drive UI on the web. This is something that's important to us, of course. So stay tuned over the next few months. As we refine that experience and give you a few more options on the development side to have those apps nicely integrated with the Drive applications on Android and iOS. But today we're not quite there, other than open with on Android. And again, take a look at the examples that are already there today. Arnie had a good question here. It's a little bit more of a product question. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about this, but he was basically asking about how do we optimize disk space. And this is somebody who's trying to move some of his attachments into Drive from Gmail. But of course, wondering about the storage and quota usage of having 2 copies of the attachments. So, a couple of people have pointed to some really helpful tools to help do some of the stuff automatically. These are some apps that have been written in AppScript, which is actually a great way to do this kind of automation. From a product perspective, I can't really, say of any plans that we're doing, other than just in general. We're always looking for opportunities to improve the integration between Drive and other products to make this a more seamless experience for users. Expect the products to evolve, expect the integrations to evolve. What they end up looking like, I don't know, but obviously we're very interested in making this as seamless as an experience for you as a user, and for developers as well. So I'm going to go back, and good question from Alexi. Is there a way to generate a preview for custom files in Google Drive? They're creating and editing specific files, and they have the capability to generate a PNG or JPEG, and then would like it to be displayed, presumably in the thumbnail view, or actually just recently was some redesigns of how we do previews. So the answer to that is yes. This is probably a poorly documented feature. It's something we launched, I think, back in October. Probably did a blog post on it, but in terms of the documentation, it's actually just buried. It's one field on the files resource and then a small blurb somewhere in a docs. And we were actually just talking about this the other day about how you can make this a lot more prominent, because we think it's actually a really cool feature, particularly with some improvements in the Drive UI to make previews much more prominent. The short answer is when you upload the file metadata, there is a property that you can set, just called thumbnail, and it takes the base64 encoded data for your thumbnail. You can upload anything up to about 2 megabytes in size. The higher the resolution you can do to fit inside that, the better. Anything above 1600 though probably isn't going to be used. We will downsample, downsize that thumbnail for the appropriate views. We won't, however, try to upsample it. So try to give us as big as the one you can within 2 megabytes. Base64 encode it, shove it in the thumbnail property, and we will take advantage of that. There are a couple catches to that. So anytime that the binary content changes, so if this is a file that you're storing the blob, you're storing the raw data in Drive, anytime that the content changes, you do need to provide a new thumbnail, because that's going to get invalidated. If you're using more of the shortcut style applications where you're only storing metadata in Drive, but the content is held elsewhere, we're not going to invalidate those when the content changes, because we simply don't know when the content changes. But it would just be your responsibility to make sure that those thumbnails are updated on an appropriate basis so that they reflect the content of the file. But yeah, it's a cool feature. If you have custom files in Drive, strongly encourage to do it, especially now that the thumbnailing and preview usage is becoming much more prominent in the Drive UI. So next question is, are there plans for public HTML hosting? Well, to enhance this, so this is the HTML hosting feature we launched a little while ago. It'd be nice to have some app script integrations and version managers and so on. So these are really good suggestions. So some of this is already available in Drive. So version management, for example, Drive is a versioned file system, so the revision history is there. Those revisions do get cleaned up periodically in the background. So if, as a user, you want to keep them around, you have to go in and you have to pin certain revisions if you want to guarantee that you can always roll back to them. It's not really featured prominently in the UI, and nor is the UI really an IDE or an authoring tool for HTML content. But there are some really cool ones that people are building. In the Chrome Web Store, there are some apps like Neutron Drive. There's Shift Edit, or can't remember the name of it, but there's a couple really cool cloud IDEs that are being backed by Drive. I don't know which of those have nice revision management integrated, but if you're the developer of those and you haven't done it, that would be a really good thing to add. And then in terms of app script integration. That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that right now, but I do know that the AppScript team is very interested in always adding features and making it easier to build apps with AppScript. They are I would say a cousin of Drive. Definitely have a common origin, but there's probably a lot that we can do. Nothing that I can really talk about or say concretely, but. It's something that we'll talk to those teams about and see how can we make these features work really well together, and it's probably something that would be really interesting and fun to work on. So let's see. Alexi says he'd like to run some code on an event in Google Drive, such as a file or folder creation, an edit, like a new version. Are there ways to do it? Yes. So there's a couple options. One is, as actually somebody pointed out in the threads, you can use AppScript, which does have some basic triggering support. If your code can't run in the AppScript container, you want to run code on your other thing, and you don't want to have that glue code where you're using the triggers of AppScript but then having to call out to another service. There is a way to do it with the changes feed. So any modification to a user's collection is reported as a change in the feed. You can pull that feed to get a list of all the modifications since the last time you checked. So polling may be an option if the frequency that you poll at isn't too high. If it's okay that there's a little bit of a delay for when that action happens and when you need to know about it, you can poll every 10-15 minutes, and that would be totally fine. For more real-time reactive stuff, the app script integration will give you a little bit better accuracy, or at least a smaller window. And then something that we announced a few weeks ago when we talked about our early access program is we are working on push notifications, which does give you that that lower latency chance to subscribe to files, to subscribe to folders, and get notified when they changed, or if an item is added to a collection, or so on. So some things you could do today, depending on your use case, either app script or polling. In the future, we're going to make it a little bit better with push. And then, yeah, you should be able to do that just fine. And there's a whole bunch of apps that are doing this today. There's, some really cool services like if this, then that. There's a couple on mobile devices that do this type of automation. Another used to be called WapWolf. Now it's called iBeamit or Beamit. Really just awesome apps that are doing exactly what you described of watching Drive or Dropbox or any other service. They're doing Twitter, you name what you name it. They're watching it and allowing you to do these types of triggers. So that's actually even another option, is going to somebody who already has that infrastructure and seeing if you can piggyback on that and do your own custom actions for one of these services like IFT. Let's see what else. So I'm going to jump up to the top here, and actually it looks like there may even be a few new posts. Oh, there's this one from Colby, of course, which is, yes, did anyone else get tricked into watching the YouTube video this morning? Yes. Of course, we're sorry about that, but it's fine. Better late than never. Tom had a good question about drive scopes on Android. It's actually a really important question. So it's saying, can we do things more restrictive than just asking for everything in Drive on Android? And you can. There's one particular catch, and this is brings up a broader point. So we do have the drive.file scope. This is something that when we did Drive version 1, this was actually the only scope that we had. And then in version 2, we added the full scope back in again. That used to be in the documents list API. And the drive.file scope does work with Android. What this will allow you to do is have access to any file that your application creates, as well as any file that the user explicitly opens. So in the case of you're doing the Drive open intent, somebody launches a file from the Drive UI, that will enable your app to open and read that file. But everything else is off limits, and is exactly the type of use case that Tom asked for. The catch, though, on Android is you have to be using the newer ways of authenticating and getting access, basically using Google Play services. The reason has to do with how application identity is established. If you're using the older, pre-Google Play services methods of authenticating and authorizing access to your app, you're actually, even though you're getting access for the user, the application that we see it as is actually just Android. It's not your specific application. And so when it comes to doing this fine-grained permissioning, that doesn't really work, because it means every application on that device would have access to the same set of files, which is really not what the intention of that feature is, nor what the user would expect. And so a while back, we actually turned off that feature. At least we're using the shared ID. If you use the Google Play services, and Google Auth Utils, basically, that capability is restored. So when we see a request from your app, it actually maps back to a project in the Google APIs console, and we have a really strong way of establishing that identity. And then we know for sure that, yes, this is your application. These are the files that the user authorized you to see, and then we can have that level of security again. So if you switch over to using that, you can then use the drive.file.scope, drive.file scope, and then have the level of security that you're looking for. One thing we're actually planning to do later in July is disable use of the older authorization mechanism for Drive completely. And it's not necessarily from a security perspective, just because if you're using the full Drive scope, every app has access to every file anyway. it's really just more for us to, for quota management, for reporting, just to make sure that we have a much more accurate picture. Plus, the new way of doing it is just much more secure in general, and we really want to get people using it. So if you're not using Google Play services yet already on Android, switch now. Just get it out there to your users, and then sometime around June or July, if you're still on the old way, we're going to start turning that off, and chances are your apps will break. So obviously we don't want that to happen. We want so there's only a handful of apps that are still on the old one. We'll be reaching out to people individually just to to make sure people are keeping up to date. But for anyone doing a new app, Play services is the way to go. David had a really good question about is there a way to actually related to this? Is there a way to limit applications to a folder? Currently, the answer is no. So as I explained earlier, we have just these two scopes. One is everything, and then the other is down to an individual file basis. The idea of doing it at a folder basis is something that we've heard quite a bit of from developers. It's something that we've been working with the engineering team to figure out if we can have this and what that timing might be. There are various technical issues that are keeping us from doing it as soon as we would like to, but it's definitely something we've gotten a lot of requests for, something that we're anxious to see added at some point. But right now, it's it's just still something that we're working through to figure out whether it's feasible or not. So stay tuned. Hopefully, we'll have some good news, but nothing on the short-term roadmap that really is going to solve for this particular use case. And somebody was asking about converting MP3s. That's not what Drive is for. So that's kind of the short answer is no, you cannot use it as a way to convert your audio files into different formats. It'd be kind of cool, but just not something that we can do. And let me just check my notifications. Oh, and just a couple of people saying they're watching now. But yeah, Colby, if you are watching and you have questions, we don't have a live chat up, unless, Dylan, do you have a live chat up anywhere?
People could comment on the YouTube video.
So yeah, there's some commenting on YouTube. Dylan can read them to me. But easiest thing for me to see them is actually just to post to the community, and I would happily answer whatever is posted. Let me just see if there's a couple last questions that I want to talk about, and if not, we'll wrap up. But let me just scroll through here a little bit, and a lot of stuff about Google App Script, people doing some really creative things. Wrong tab. But it looks like that may be it. Colby, since you were asking about live questions, feel free to post things later. We'll follow up in the community or on Stack Overflow. And again, we're just always happy to talk to people and figure out what you're doing. And certainly, feel free to just post in the forum about what you're actually building. We get a little bit of insight from our logs and from the API projects. But a lot of times all we're seeing is an application title, which isn't always the most informative thing. So if you are building something that you think is just really cool, post in the community about it. Let people know. Let other developers know. Let us know. And if it's something really interesting, we'd love to chat more about it and see what we can do to make it better. So with that, since we're out of questions, I'm going to wrap it up. We will be back next week. I think next Tuesday. I think we're broadcasting from either Tuesday or Friday. We'll be broadcasting from Zurich. It'll be Nicola. Yeah, lots of cool stuff on the horizon. We're actually want to just quick shout out to everyone who was joined the early access program. We've gotten a lot of people in there. If you haven't heard back, chances are it means you weren't in. Haven't sent emails to everyone to confirm that, but I'll try to get confirmations out to everyone just so you know for sure that we did look at you and just wasn't a right fit at this time. But the people who are in, we're really happy to see that people are doing really interesting stuff and getting us feedback. So keep it coming. And if you haven't heard and you still think you want to, you can do some really cool stuff with the newer features. Just apply again, and we'll reconsider. But we're actually really happy with how that's turning out. So great job to everyone who's doing that. Yeah, and that's it. So come back Tuesday, and we'll see you soon. All right, thanks.